one, use the right tools. I'm sorry to say this, and I don't say this for mixed media work or acrylics, but having the right brush and having the right paper is a must when watercoloring. So today I am starting with this Arteza watercolor paper. Now, tip number one, which we just discovered, was use the right tools, and that includes paper and brushes. It's not a joke, okay? If you're using inferior products, your works will actually come out in an inferior fashion. But I think what's most important, even more important than brushes, is your paper. For watercolors, that's super duper important. So today I'm using this sheet of 32 watercolor paper pads. I'm not even talking correctly, but Arteza. They sent this to me for free to try. I've already tried this out and I actually love this paper. Now normally paper comes in either hot press, which is smooth, or cold press, which is bumpy. This is kind of just like right in the middle. It's cold press, but I like it because it's not too bumpy, and while it is have some texture to it, which is common with cold press paper, it's not like overly bumpy. It still has a really smooth feel, and I like that. It's kind of, for me, like a combination between smooth and hot together. So I actually really like this paper, and I'm not just saying that. They did not pay me to say that. I really do like this paper. And when getting started, I always use some nice clear water, and I always put some glass beads in the bottom of my glass because it makes for, it helps shake the paint off more quickly. And my favorite watercolor brushes cost a fortune, but so worth it. They are these black velvet silver brand, and it's funny, I've been collecting brushes my whole life, and I have this giant collection of brushes, and once I bought these, I don't use anything else. So it's like if you're starting from scratch, it's kind of just worth to go to the top dog first, and then rather than waste your money in all sorts of, you know, insufficient items. Tip 2, you can either work wet into wet, meaning you wet your paper first and then put the color in, or you can work wet into dry, which is when you take your wet paintbrush on dry paper and brush. Okay, the reference I'm using today is this little poppy print. It's a photograph. I'm doing this for my sister, who is, you know, very demanding. She just says, I want you to make me this, and then I have to do it because she's actually really awesome and is very generous, so I am actually all too happy to make her something. Now, I don't have any painter's tape, but if you want to make like a nice automatic, if you will, frame for your piece, or the size of the paper is too large for your purposes, or you just want to make like a cute design, you can use painter's tape or washi tape to mask out your area. You can either leave it down as a cute frame, or you can then lift it up when you're done, and then the watercolors will just go to the, you know, into the parameters of the square that you build with your tape. Okay, tip 2. Wet on wet or wet versus dry. Well, what does that mean? So first what I'm gonna do, because I'm gonna show you, is find a pencil. Okay, first thing I need to do is draw my poppy in. I can't tell if this is straight or not, but that's straight enough. So I'm going to loosely sketch in my poppy here. There's like this. So I'm going to sketch in my poppy because I don't want the background to wash into that, and everything else is kind of fair game. And there's like the background is here, and then there's going to be some buds up in here, but I'm okay. Those are so kind of different aspects, so I'm okay if my colors droop into that. Okay, so what does wet into wet and wet into dry mean? Wet into wet is, first you take just some clear water, and it means you literally wet your paper. Now I'm going to keep this, the area where the poppy is, dry. Okay, so the watercolor goes where the wet is. So there's no wet there, it's not going to go there. It's pretty much as simple as that. Whee! So I'm painting right now with just water. Okay, so this demonstrates the wet on wet technique. Now I want like a sky color. This is, let's see. Oh, this is this gorgeous. This is by Core. This is Core Phthalo Blue. B with green. All right, and if you can see, I am putting wet into wet. It gives it one very specific kind of, it has movement. Okay. And it is moving around. It's not going to go in there because there's no water in there. And I'm also careful not to touch the parameters of my poppy. Okay. And I'm just going to let it do its thing. That's the thing with watercolors. It kind of like, just give it like a little freedom. I think people get nervous because there's no control, but like you kind of just got to go with the flow sometimes. And say I want, like this area is very cloudy. There's not a lot of cover there. While it's still wet, I can just take like a paper towel and like lift out. I'm lifting out and, oh, those are the poppies I was gonna say. It looks like hairs, but that's actually just the poppy. So you can lift out some of that to create the illusion of clouds in the sky, right? And say I want it a little bit more up here, then I can actually go in and add the corner. You can drop it back in while it's still wet. This is called dropping in color, and you're just touching the areas that are still wet and you're literally dropping them into your picture. Along the horizon line, it gets a little bit more accentuated. And you like let it just do whatever it wants. Give it a little freedom to go where it wants. Now if this is too concentrated right here and I want to move it, then I can just add like plain water to it. I'm just adding water and that will spread it out a bit. But like there's like a hard line there and I think it's pretty. So like chill out and let the watercolor just work its magic, right? So you can take it up or you can leave it there. All right, so now that's wet on wet. So now I want to make this bottom part green because that's what I'm seeing in my picture. You need to make sure you have some paper towels on hand. So when you're cleaning your brush, before you start a new color, you want to get all the pigment of the first color out. That's why I have those glass beads in there. Okay, and I'm making this part wet. Now the green is gonna bleed into the blue because it's wet next to wet. And we already know wet on wet, it's gonna move where the wet is, okay? You just have to be aware and say, come to peace with it. Okay, so again, my floor is wet, my paint is wet, wet on wet, and they just marry together. Okay, boo boo boo. Yay! We're having like a party on the paper. All right, if that's like too saturated and wet, then you can feel free to pick up some of those pieces. That's fine. If you want a little bit more color and a little bit less of the washi, then you just use less water in your paints, right? That's not rocket science. Like 6-year-olds can figure that out. And don't give me those excuses like, did you just insult me like a 6-year-old? I mean, come on, you can do this. We can do this, you guys. All right, so now this is like a hot mess. I am not a patient person, so I right away take my hairdryer or my heat gun and I'm gonna dry this dry right now so we don't have to wait to move on to the next part. Tip 3, don't freak out. Just go with the flow and learn to see the beauty in your watercolor marks instead of only the flaws. And while I'm drawing this, I'm going to segue into the third tip, which we discussed is don't freak out if you see something happening. I'm looking at here, I see this is making a beautiful plume type shape. My green is going into the blue. Am I gonna freak out about that? No. You're not gonna freak out about that because you have some control over this stuff. You can either wet it with your paper towel or you can just let it go. Just let it go. The reason that people like watercolor is that it is unpredictable and it makes very unique results, okay? So please don't freak out. It's all good. Okay, you can make changes at any time and you can also just let it move. You'd be so surprised at the really cool effects you can make with watercolor by just letting watercolor do its thing. Now let's keep drawing this. A little more about tip 3 in the don't freak out department. So I was just drawing this with my heat gun and I realized, oh no, I got 2 splashes on my paper. And instead of freaking out, because we're not gonna freak out, I'm gonna say, okay, something got on my paper. How do I go with the flow and work with this and not freak out? Say, pretend all of your mistakes are things that you meant to do on purpose. Say, oh, I got some splashes there. Well, maybe we need to carry that theme throughout. And we will, I meant to do that. Just say, like, this is like a Bob Ross moment when you're like, oh, happy little accident. I meant to do that. How can I make the most of this mistake and make it look intentional? And you just keep going with it. And look how cute that background is now. It's like 10 times cuter than it was a hot second ago. So that's why you should not freak out. You just pretend at all your mistakes that you meant to do it and what can you take it, how can you take it to the next step and make it intentional. Let's keep drawing. Tip 4, you can layer in watercolor. So what you don't achieve in the first layer, you can achieve in the second or third or fourth layer. So don't stop and don't give up. Okay, tip number 4 is layering. So I mentioned what you don't see in the first layer, you can accomplish by doing multiple layers. So a lot of times I think people are frustrated because, you know, they do all this work and then they're like, but that's not what I just watercolored this and it doesn't look done. And that's because you're not done and you need to do more layers. That's one thing I didn't understand for a long time. So like this green can be a lot deeper than it appears. And this also goes back to tip 2, which is working, you can choose between working wet on wet and wet on dry. So if I want to add a little, and you always have this choice of wetting an area first and working on top or working onto the paper when it's dry. And this is something that you need to decide for yourself. Okay, and this could change and there's no right or wrong answers. So you might decide that you always like working wet on wet because you like how your paint behaves. You might decide that you hate working wet on wet because it's too loosey-goosey and you need to work wet on dry. So it's up to you. We can't tell you what is the right way and the wrong way to do it, but you can learn by practicing and figuring out the answer to that yourself, okay? So, like everything, and no matter what you're doing in life, you need to practice in order to figure things out and to hone your skills. So I'm adding another layer, and then I'm gonna wait for that to dry. If it's too wet, if I'm thinking it's too wet, it's freaking me out, I can dab it a little bit with a paper towel if I want to. Okay? And then dry the rest with a heat gun, because ain't nobody got time to sit around and wait for paint to dry. Okay, so that's my second layer, and that's still not dark enough for me. So guess what? I can do a third layer now too. And just a word on this line. If you see a hard line like this between your layers and you don't like that, all you have to do is add a little clear water. Just add plain water with your brush, and you can kind of squiggle your brush around and that will blend that line away, okay? So let's add, let's see, the third layer. And you need to decide, are you a loose person? Are you a controlled person? Everybody has like their comfort level of what they're comfortable with. And I can't answer that for you. That's something that you can't teach. That's something that you just have to learn about yourself. You know, do you like loosey-goosey things? Do you like tightly controlled watercolor? I mean, you can get completely realistic looks. You can keep it very dreamy and very whimsical, and a lot of that has to do with just your brush strokes and whether or not you're doing how you're doing it. Now I'm going wet on dry now, and as you can see, it's much more pronounced. Okay, and it's much more, well, it doesn't blend the way it blends when your surface is all wet. So that's a really big difference. And I'm good with that, okay? Tip 5, you need to understand that you can fix mistakes in watercolor and you can even erase. So this brings me to tip 5, which is again what I just touched on. You can fix things. If there's something that you don't like, you can erase. So say I don't like this dark spot right here. If you wet an area, because watercolor will activate forever. So as long as you're adding water to it, it's going to activate. It's actually erasing right now. But if you pool a lot of water there and you touch down with a paper towel, you can erase that spot. Okay, so there are ways to fix your mistakes. You can always add water to continue blending things. And this is why having good quality paper is super important, because if you're working on cheap paper, it can't handle that much water. And it will start to break down and it will start to dissolve, and it's not good. So that's why, another reason why good paper is super important. Okay, so now I'm gonna continue working with just the wet onto dry. I want everything to be dry because I want the stems to the poppy to really stick out really in a very defined manner. And in order, if I'm working wet on wet, it's just gonna blend and ooze with the water. If this is dry underneath it and I'm putting down lines on top, it's gonna stay very crisp. And that's the biggest difference. So let's just try this, finish. Another reason I can feel this is buckling, because it's so wet. That will calm down as it dries inside the fibers of that paper. But again, the better and the hardier the paper, then the less that will happen. So let's go ahead and just stick some stems in here. I have this really cool, this is called a striper, and it's it like tapers down to the bottom, but it makes really cool defined lines that I love to play with. I also have this little script. Oh, great. That's our nuclear power plant making a warning signal. That's never a good sign. Well, I'm just gonna ignore it and hope that my town doesn't burn down. Anywho, all right, here's my script, which will do the same thing. It comes to a very fine point, but I do love this. I'm not gonna lie. This striper comes to a very fine point as well, and it's just kind of a lot of fun. So I'm going to take, this is the green I've been using, is the Bicore, and it's sap green, and I don't want too much water in it again because I don't want it to blend out. I want it to like stay strong and well defined. So I'm going to put some I'm just going to put some stems on these poppies. Ooh, so scary. And see how that stays very strong. It's not blending into the background. And I love the poppy stems, you know, because they always have the big swish. Now, if that's hard and you don't like the feel of that, try a different brush. Tip 6, have fun and practice. The more you have fun and relax, and the more you practice, the better your work will be. You have to remember, in art there's no rules, and you gotta just try stuff. You have to have an adventurous spirit all the time. And oddly or ironically enough, the way to become more successful is to make as many mistakes as you can, because then really you guys spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to fix them and prevent them from happening. And that whole process of experimenting is what makes you a good artist, because you learn from all those trials. So you should never worry about making mistakes. If anything, you should kind of aim to make some mistakes, because that whole learning process is what's going to make you such a strong artist. And of course you should really need to have some fun, because otherwise, what the heck? The heck is it even for? Alright, so there's all these poppy stems. Boop, 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 boop. Kind of making some of these up. It's fine, this one can go off. And there's some like things, that's fine by now. And the poppy little buds, I always save the best for last. Like when I'm doing portraits, I always do the eyes last. Same thing, that red poppy is gonna go last. Sorry. It's just the way I like to work. I like to savor the goodness of the painting. So for these poppies, I'm just gonna, you know, making a poppy shape. Boop, boop, ba-doo. Boop, boop, ba-doo. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. And what's cool, again, you can layer over anything. Again, if something is too light or too dark, if it's too dark, you can pat it with a paper towel and try to kick back some of the colors, right? If it's too light, you can go back with a second coat. So you really do have control, and that is not lying. All right, for our poppy is gonna be nice bright red, which I don't think I have any out right now, so I'm gonna go hunt down some bright red. All right, that did not take me very long. So again, this is a core, and again, I'm gonna stay working, on my dry paper because I want this to be bold and beautiful. And I have that shape sketched out. So I'm gonna go ahead and draw my leaves. I'm doing this one first. All right, and as far as like just laying down, I don't, like this isn't, you don't need to be like madly skilled at wielding a brush. You really don't. You can just kind of plop down your layers. If whatever is down first is dry, you're not gonna interact with it, so you're good. Okay, so you need to have fun, play. Now I'm gonna do, that's the first coat. And also, why I have this red out, remember our fun background that we decided to do, that I decided to do based on my mistake. Get some red splashes in here too. And they look dark, they're not quite red because they're so if I actually lift off some of that color with my paper towel, it goes from being like magenta to, or super duper almost maroon to like red because it was so concentrated in color you couldn't see that. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let that dry, and then I'm gonna do another coat to like really punch that up. Okay, so that's coat one. Now I need to add some kind of darker areas or this is gonna end up looking very flat. I'm gonna add some alizarin or alizarin crimson by Winsor Newton, and I'm looking at my reference and I'm trying to find out where the pieces are. Okay, so we have that kind of a darker area there, and this is like a petal in the center, so that would be casting like a shadow on this side. And also one on this side. It kind of makes it like stand out. You know, like these two are behind the one in the center, so that's why they'd be a little bit darker. And maybe center is a little dark. And it looks like the top is like scalloped and a little bit darker. The top, it's not quite so perfect. And then really close to the bottom, I'm gonna add in a touch of, hold on buddy, Payne's Gray. And this just adds some shadow along the bottom while it is wet to give it some more depth. And then I'm going to stand back and see what I think as it dries. Okay, so I dried it with my hair dryer or my heat gun. And if you're not loving it, you can always go back with some water and soften up any edges that you would like to soften. And take advantage of its like magnificent, you know, eternal water soluble properties. And you just really need to play and forgive yourself for mistakes. You're all learning, we're all learning. And every project you do, you will continue to learn new and more things. So don't worry about it, guys. It's all good. Play, try making it wet and adding on more watercolor on top. And if you like, you can keep the washi tape, and if you don't, you can just peel it away when you're done, and as you will see, it creates this super cute frame around your piece. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you were able to learn a couple things, and I hope my sister likes her project. And yeah, there we go. Just sign it with a little heart so she knows I love her. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. And I do have a full-length watercolor class called Wondrous Watercolors, and you can find that at awesomeartschool.com. But I hope today just gave you some quick tips to get you headed in the right direction. And of course, the sixth tip is always just have fun. Just have fun. It's all good. You learn with every piece, so just keep making them and try to relax and enjoy yourself. All right, thanks for being here. Bye.